I don't think they're the worst team in the league right now, but they're near the bottom of the standings, and that is the San Antonio Spurs, who obviously have a prospect who is probably going to be running the league for a lot of years to come. But
we get our wins here and there.
That is true. Y'all did beat the Nuggets. You actually spoiled them from getting first place in the West.
Exactly.
Which is major.
Can the Pistons do that? Didn't think so.
Exactly. But they are still probably going to have a top pick in this year's draft. So what do you guys, as far as next year, what would you guys like to see, whether it be, I know there's rumors of them trading for Trae Young, potentially. And obviously there's some guards in this draft, and people kind of consensusly agree that's one of their major needs. So what would you guys ideally like to see the Spurs do going into next year?
For me, I think there's like two clear avenues I think that could really help them going forward. I think if there's a guard that they like in the top of the class, that's definitely what they should do. That's probably their biggest glaring need. Like someone like a Rob Dillingham or a Reed Shepherd or somebody, if they fall in love with one of those guys, I can definitely see them taking them. But something that's been like I've been contemplating over the last couple of days is what if they decide to go big man? Like I know they have Victor, but if you look at the team that's dominating the West right now, they have Jokic, and he's not necessarily like the greatest matchup for him. And just like building your team, I think if you add somebody who can also protect the rim and you pair him with Victor Wembanyama, like that could be a really good backbone to like probably the best defense in the league eventually. So they would be someone I will also watch for like a Donovan Clingan, as I think those two could like really play well together.
I think that is an interesting perspective. Like I genuinely think it's a good perspective, because I think with Wemby, like a lot of bigs who are in this situation, like you look at a guy like Zion, obviously they're two very different guys, but he kind of dominates the paint and he plays more of that 4 position. Sometimes he does play point, but like ideally he's more of a 4. But I think he has the spacing where you can kind of make something like that work, and you can have another big on the floor. And Clingan, we talked about too. He's a guy who's more of an anchor. Wemby can be too, but I think it does add a little bit more versatility. And I think too, Wemby is kind of a skinnier guy. And you look at a team like the Thunder, they have Chet Holmgren, who's pretty, I don't want to say similar, but they have kind of similar archetypes.
Same type of play.
Yeah.
Same type.
And like one of the biggest questions about the Thunder going into the playoffs is like how they will match up against a team that has a lot more size, like the Lakers, for instance. So I think the Spurs, they could potentially run into some of that too if they don't have another big outside of Wemby. Although Wemby can do a lot more, and he's defensively, I think he does a lot more than Chet does. I'm not saying Chet's a bad defender, because he's obviously not. But I think getting another big, honestly, wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, especially, too, when you consider, like, yeah, you can get a guard, but I think most of the time the ball is still going to be in Wemby's hands at the end of the day.
Something that I think, like, if we are talking about potentially trading for, like, a Trae Young or a top guard, I would just worry about the roster construction, because unless they're going to give away pretty much all their picks for the future, you would think they have to give up at least one of like Keldon Johnson or Devin Vassell, or maybe both. And at that point, you're pretty much rebuilding your wing from the ground up. And if you get rid of one or two of those guys and future picks, I feel like it's going to be pretty difficult to find some sort of option that's quality at that 3 or at the wing. Whereas I feel like if they try to build through the draft, like you said, they could go get a big like Clingan, or they could try to take a shot on some of these other guards that have a lot of potential. I just feel like it'd be better timeline-wise to not rush an all-star guard in with Victor in year 2 and try to push for the playoffs.
Yeah, I think it would definitely be a situation where they would have to evaluate how good they think that would make them next year. Like if you think trading for Trae Young, if you're able to keep, let's say, Devin Vassell, and you trade away Keldon Johnson, some picks, if you can put Trae Young, Devin Vassell, and Victor Wembanyama as the backbone of your team, how far away is that 3-man group from being like a serious contender? I think in a Western Conference, it does, like, it would give me some hesitancy. Like, maybe we're a little farther, like, maybe that's a little farther than we think it is because realistically, who would they replace? Like, is that unit better than Sacramento as a whole team? Is that unit better than the Pelicans as a whole team? So I think building through the draft is more viable, but I think from watching Victor this year, like, he's someone who really wants to win. So if he goes to them this offseason and is like, hey, like, can we push the chips in now? Like, I think then you kind of have to listen because I don't think there's a limit to where he could be in like a couple of years. So if now you think if there's a player you're in love with now on the trade market, whether it's Donovan Mitchell, Trae Young, if it's someone you believe that you pair him with Victor, we're for sure contenders for the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
I think you go ahead and pull it.
And it does make sense, like, probably by 2025 or maybe more like 2026, Victor's probably going to be solidified as a top 10 overall player. So at that point, you're thinking we have a top 10 player and we have Trae Young as our number 2. That is a pretty good dynamic duo. And then, if you can keep one of Johnson or Vassell as like a third option, that'd be solid as well. It's just a matter of is that mix going to work? Like, because obviously Trae Young is one of the least effective defensive players in that guard room. And maybe they're thinking that combo with Wemby would be helpful, but we've seen him play with other shot blockers like Clint Capella, and it has had varying success.
Yeah, I think if there's a world where you can maybe trade 25's pick, which I think I'll have more value anyway, to be completely honest. If you could trade like 25, Keldon Johnson, probably the 27 if they still have it, and some other varying like low roster pieces. If that's the deal and you still get to hold on to your top pick this year, I think you go ahead and do it. And you either take like a Modest Buzelis at the top of this year's draft or like a Donovan Clingan. I think that kind of helps your defense a lot. Because if you were to take, let's say they take Clingan, you have Clingan, Victor, Devin Vassell, and Trae Young. And while Vassell and Trae Young aren't plus defenders, I don't think if you blow past them, you're not going to have very much space to finish with Clingan and Wembanyama down low.
I'm interested to see if they do end up taking a guard, and obviously we don't know the lottery like yet, and I'm just interested to see like if they do get the top pick or one of the top picks, and they have like a wide selection of guards to choose from, and Dillingham, Shepherd, Topic as well, Collier. I think even you could put Castle in there. I'm just curious, like, what would they go with? Because Shepherd, Dillingham, I think they're more scoring guards. Topic is he's kind of a scorer too, but he's a little bit better of a playmaker. Collier, he's kind of, I don't really know how to describe Collier, but like he does all those things. So I'm just wondering, do you think that they would try to go for more of a scoring guard, or would they go for more of a passer like Topic? And obviously Pop has a long history of drafting not just European guards, but foreign guards as well. So what do you guys think they would try to get to accommodate Wemby?
I would hope that it would be someone who's willing to pass the ball and be a second or third offensive option. I feel like, yeah, it'd be nice to have, like, if they don't make a trade, and it'd be nice to have someone like Rob Dillingham who could go get you 20 points himself. But at the same time, you're trying to showcase Victor and give him as many opportunities as possible to carry your team. So I could see both sides, but I personally would go for someone who's going to give Victor the ball in those final minutes rather than, dribble ISO and try to take the last shot.
Yeah, I would say I think I might be on the opposite end, because I think if you look at what worked for them in the past, they took Tony Parker, who, while he did pass the ball, he could definitely go and get his own when he needed to. And I think especially when you get into the playoffs with big men, it can kind of get hard getting them the ball. Obviously, Victor's a little different. I don't know how that's going to look in the playoffs, but I think just giving him someone who can go out, get his own shot, so he doesn't always have to. Like, it's not completely Victor focused, like giving him a viable guy who could be a second option. I think that would be the best way to go. And unless like Popovich like just doesn't want to deal with the headache of trying to get Dillingham better on defense, I think that would be the guy I would go with, because not only per 36 minutes did he average 20 plus points, he also averaged the most assists out of all those guards we just named per 36. So I think he would definitely be someone I would look at. If not, I could also see like Stephon Castle being their type of player.
It's interesting too, because I was just a minute ago talking about how I would build through the draft, but they also have the youngest average player age in the entire league at less than 23 years old for their entire roster on average. So maybe they're saying we're already way too young. We don't need to keep building through the draft. We like our young players that we have, and now we want to get older. So I feel like they are a team that this offseason and maybe next offseason could really tip the scales to their success long term, which that's a lot of pressure if you're the Spurs GM.
I wouldn't be surprised if they did something like what the Rockets did this past summer, where they signed Fred VanVleet, Jock Landale, Jeff Green again.
Dylan Brooks.
Yeah, Dylan Brooks. Like, I remember at the time it was kind of I kind of liked the move at the time, but I remember a lot of people were indifferent to it. But I think for the Spurs, like, you have a lot of young pieces, and I think they'll still probably try and go after somebody, and obviously they're going to go after somebody in this draft. But I think getting vets too, and you saw it with the Rockets this year, like, they didn't make the play-in, but they were right there. Like, getting vets is what kind of helps you take that leap. And right now, they have Chetty Osman, they have Zach Collins, but I think they need a little bit more of some established vet guys. It doesn't have to be anybody crazy, but just somebody who can also give you a little bit more production as well, and has shown that they can do that. I think now whether they do that this year or next year, I think that'll decide when they kind of take their leap.
I think definitely with the new CBA, I know teams are required to spend a certain percentage of the salary cap, or like they'll get penalized for it. So I think you could definitely see something like that happen this year. And I think there's some very interesting guys in free agency, especially because it's kind of top heavy. Like, you have LeBron and Paul George entering free agency this year. I think they'll be able to find some really good value with maybe guys like a Miles Bridges, Tobias Harris, like to fill that wing spot, especially because these aren't necessarily guys you have to be married to for the long term. Like, these could just be guys to kind of appease Wemby. Like, look, we are trying to win. Like, we want you to stay. Like, don't even think about going to Orioles. We're trying to win.
Even someone like a KCP, like, that's not a name that's going to be like, oh, wow, like, look out. But that's someone who can come in, shoot over 35% from three, be a quality starter for the entire season if they end up making a trade where some of their wings go away. And he's had success in the past. Like, he's been good in the playoffs. So I wouldn't be surprised if they start to go after names like that. I see Malik Beasley down here as well. He's having a great year shooting the ball. He was in the three-point contest. So I feel like surrounding Victor with shooters on the perimeter so that they can continue to space the floor so that he can work inside, but also, when that help defense comes, he just dishes it out, and it's a splash town.
I think somebody like Malik Monk too, Bruce Brown. Like, there's really good guys in this class, and like, you don't have to be married. Like, I think they can kind of do what the Rockets did. The Rockets, while they gave Van Fleet and Dylan Brooks like a lot of money, they only gave them 2 to 3 year deals. So, like, while it didn't look like it made the most sense at the time, like, look, if you look at how it turned out for them, they almost made the playoffs this year. They'll probably be in position to make another playoff push next year. And if they're not, and it's not going well, those guys' contracts are about to be done. Now you have good quality, like, expiring contracts on your books for that third year. So I think that's probably the direction I see them going this offseason.
Yeah. Another guy, too, who is on the free agency list is Gordon Hayward. I know he just got traded to OKC. I'm not sure if it's a player option. I think it is. But I think that would also be I think that would be actually a really good vet to get, because he kind of does a little bit of everything. He can score, obviously. And I think San Antonio would just be a good fit for him, because unlike Charlotte, I feel like there's just more guys who are locked in, And I think a lot of the issue with Charlotte is that they were just injured, and now he's with OKC, and they're a contending team, and we'll see how that plays out. But if he's available, I feel like Gordon Hayward would be another good vet to go after. Bruce Brown, that's one that I feel like would really fit with what they do, especially with everything he provides defensively. I think that, like, yeah, we can talk about the young guys, but I think you do still need those vets to kind of help you out and to get you where you want to go, because otherwise I think you just kind of stay in the same spot. And it also helps the younger guys' development, you know? Like, even if, say, they miss on this year's draft pick, like, if they bring in a vet, that could help Devin Vassell or Keldon Johnson, if they're still there. That could help them take a leap that they may not have even known that they could take.
Yeah, it's definitely like, I feel that if I was a Spurs GM, I would just be kicking myself that this year's draft class isn't like next year's. I feel like this year's free agency class is almost perfectly set up to where there's a lot of guys where you could build a winning team around. But the only thing with the Spurs is they don't have a clear number 2 at the moment.
Yeah.
So if they could like draft one, that would be great. But I think they might have to wait another year for that. But I think there's definitely some pieces like Tyus Jones is a free agent. There's just a lot of guys here that would be great on this, like with Victor Wembanyama as their teammate.
Yeah, and I mentioned they need to bring in some shooting to help keep that floor spaced for Victor, but San Antonio was the 5th worst defense in terms of giving up points. They gave up almost 119 per game, which you think, you know, they've got Victor, who's potentially going to win Defensive Player of the Year. That's just not acceptable as a team. Like, you have to be, if you're going to have the Defensive Player of the Year candidate, you got to be top 10, in my opinion. So I would not be surprised if they're probably going to add a couple of guys that clearly are added for that shooting, but they will also add players either in the draft or in free agency where you're like, that doesn't really add that much to them, but it's a more of a defensive focused pickup, like someone at the 2 spot who, you know, they might not be an elite scorer, but they can go lock down on the bench.
Like a DeAnthony Milton or something like that.
Something like that, because 119 points a game allowed, that is not a winning recipe. So they got to figure that out.
And you have Wemby, who's putting up, I'm not trying to knock the Spurs. Brody's obviously a Spurs fan. But, like, you have Wemby, who's putting up insane defensive numbers. Do you know how bad the rest of the team has to be doing if they're that low? Like, that's kind of pathetic, I'm not going to lie.
It's not great.